The wind crawled low across the desert that evening, dragging a skin of dust over the empty road. The New Mexico sun had long since burned the world to golden bone, and now it sank red behind the mesas, leaving the air trembling with heat. Along that road, a woman stumbled barefoot, her dress torn to threads, her steps heavy and uneven like someone wading through water that wasn't there. Her name was Clara Wynne, though few in Dry Creek would remember it now. She had walked since dawn. The last of her strength was gone by the time she saw the fence line, a crooked stretch of wire half buried in sand. Beyond it, a ranch spread into the haze, silent and forgotten. She tried to call out, but her lips cracked at the sound. The canteen at her side was empty. She'd traded the last of her food for a single drink in Dry Creek, but they'd thrown her out before she could finish it. When her knees gave way, the dust rose around her like smoke. She fell hard, cheek pressed to the earth, staring at the faded boots of a scarecrow standing lopsided by the gate. The sky above her blurred, and she thought she saw a man's shadow moving across it. Then everything went dark. The next thing she knew, someone was lifting her head. A rough hand brushed the dust from her face. His voice came low, steady as a river's hum. "Easy now." She blinked, vision swimming into focus. A tall man knelt beside her, coat long and worn at the elbows, hat pulled low against the sun. His face was carved by years of wind and silence, his eyes a pale gray that seemed to see right through the world. He held out a small piece of bread, no bigger than his palm, the crust torn rough. She stared at it like it was a miracle. "Go on," he said quietly. "Ain't much, but it's clean." She took it, trembling, and bit slowly, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. He didn't speak again, just waited until she finished. Then, without another word, he lifted her into his arms. The cabin wasn't far, a single-room house pressed up against the foothills, surrounded by nothing but open land and silence. He set her down on a narrow bed and poured water into a tin cup. When she tried to speak, her voice came out cracked and small. You didn't have to stop." The man shrugged, hanging his hat on a nail. "Not many do," he said. His name, she learned later, was Elias Crow. He didn't say much else. He moved about the cabin in quiet rhythm, lighting a small lamp, stirring a pot that smelled faintly of beans and sage, glancing toward the window as if listening for something in the distance. When the thunder rolled faintly across the horizon, he looked almost relieved. Clara tried to sit up, her body shaking. "They called me a thief's widow," she whispered. "Said I brought bad luck." Elias turned to her, his face unreadable. "Dry Creek's good at talkin'. Not much else." Her eyes darted to the window, remembering the faces that had spat at her, the laughter when she begged for water. "They said my husband worked with outlaws. But he didn't. We were moving west. They stopped us by the canyon road. 3 men. One with a scar on his chin." Her hands gripped the blanket tight. "They shot him. Took our wagon. Left me there." Elias didn't ask questions. He poured her another cup of water and handed it over, his fingers steady, calloused, gentle. "I walked for 2 days," she said. "I thought maybe the Lord forgot me." He sat down in the chair across from her, boots creaking. "Sometimes the Lord leaves it to men," he said softly. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap against the roof. The smell of dust and water mixed in the air, a rare scent in that part of the world. Elias rose, went to the door, and secured the latch. Lightning flashed far away, throwing his shadow across the wall. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind hissed through the cracks in the boards, whispering like a ghost passing by. When she finally broke the silence, her voice carried a strange calm. "His name was Clay Harlow," she said. "The man with the scar. He led the gang. They said he runs Dry Creek now." The name hung heavy in the air. Elias froze, his hand still on the latch. His shoulders tightened, and for the first time, Clara saw something flash in his eyes, something sharp and buried deep. Then he turned away, slow and deliberate, as if folding the thought back inside him. "You should rest," he said, his tone steady again. She wanted to ask more, why his face went pale, why he seemed to know that name, but exhaustion pulled her down. She lay back, watching the lamplight flicker against the ceiling. His voice reached her one last time through the soft roll of thunder. "Ain't no one deserves to die hungry out here," he said. Then the lamp dimmed, and she drifted into sleep. When the wind rose again, it carried the low creak of floorboards. Clara stirred, eyes half open. The room glowed faintly from the dying fire. Elias sat at the table, his back to her. The storm outside had grown fierce, rain striking the windows like thrown pebbles. He was cleaning a revolver. The metal caught the firelight, gleaming in his hands like something sacred and dangerous. His movements were slow, precise, ritualistic. He ran a cloth down the barrel, turned the cylinder, and laid each bullet in order beside him. For a moment she thought he was just a cautious man, keeping ready for the wilds. But then her gaze caught on the handle, worn smooth by years of use. Carved faintly into it were letters, barely visible in the flicker of flame, U.S. Marshal. Clara's breath caught. The rain thundered harder against the roof, drowning the sound of her heartbeat. Elias didn't see her watching. He set the revolver down, his eyes lost somewhere far beyond the cabin walls, far beyond the storm. Outside, lightning split the night, and for an instant his face looked haunted, like a man who'd once stood for justice, and lost everything because of it. Dawn rose over the desert like a pale ghost, spilling weak light over the endless flat of red dust. The rain had passed in the night, leaving the world washed but still hollow, still aching. Smoke curled from Elias Crow's chimney, and the air smelled of wet earth and coffee. Clara stood at the fence, her hair tangled, the borrowed coat too large for her thin frame. She had slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks, yet rest hadn't found her. The moment her eyes opened, she knew she couldn't stay hidden in this cabin while the men who destroyed her life drank whiskey in town. "I'm going," she said when Elias stepped out onto the porch, tin cup steaming in his hand. His eyes flicked toward her, calm as ever. "Where?" "Dry Creek," she said, straightening. "They have a livery, a hotel. I can find work." He didn't answer right away, just looked past her to the far horizon where the town sat like a wound in the land. "Men who burned your wagon own that town," he said. "Work there means servin' the devil his supper." She turned, her chin high though her hands trembled. "Then maybe it's time someone spoiled his appetite." Elias studied her for a long moment. The wind caught the brim of his hat, and his gaze softened just enough to show what lay beneath the silence, a kind of weary respect. "You're not goin' alone." By mid-morning they were on horseback, two silhouettes moving across the wasteland, dust curling at their heels. Clara's borrowed mare stumbled on the dry road, and Elias slowed his gray to match her pace. He said little, though she caught him glancing her way now and then, as if measuring the courage that had driven her out here. She didn't speak either, afraid her voice would betray how badly her heart was pounding. Dry Creek appeared from the shimmer like a mirage, a single main street lined with false fronts, windows boarded, paint flaked to gray. A few people lingered near the general store, faces hollow, eyes darting to the stranger and the woman beside him. A dog barked once, then fell silent. As they rode down the street, whispers rose like wind through grass. "Crow," someone muttered. "Didn't think he was still alive." Others turned away, pulling their children inside. At the saloon, the batwing doors swung open and the smell of stale whiskey and tobacco rolled out. A piano somewhere inside went quiet mid-tune. Elias dismounted first, tying his horse to the post with the unhurried calm of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Clara followed, every eye on her. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and sawdust. A few men sat frozen at their tables, mugs halfway to their lips. Behind the counter stood a tall, thin man with a badge pinned crooked to his vest, one Clara recognized even through the haze of memory. His grin was sharp and cruel. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "The ghost rancher rides again." Elias's eyes drifted to the badge, then to the man's hand resting too close to his holster. "Since when does Clay Harlow's dog wear a star?" The room tensed. The man's grin faltered. "You watch your tongue, Crow. You're talkin' to the law." Elias stepped closer, his boots slow against the creaking boards. "Law," he said softly. "I remember when law didn't rob wagons and leave women to die." A murmur ran through the crowd. Clara's breath caught as the man's hand twitched near his gun. She saw his face clearly now, the same one who had laughed when her husband begged for mercy. Her voice trembled but carried across the saloon like a whip crack. "That's him," she said. "That's the one who shot my husband." The man froze, the grin sliding off his face. Elias's gaze shifted, calm but cutting. "That true?" he asked. The outlaw-turned-deputy spat to the side. "She's lyin'. Harlow told me she was." The rest was lost beneath the sudden sound of iron. Elias's revolver cleared leather in a single breath, the motion too fast for the eye. A shot rang out, the bullet striking the man's pistol mid-draw. The weapon clattered to the floor, its trigger guard bent, the man yelping as it spun away. Elias didn't move. He hadn't aimed for the man's heart, just his pride. "I buried my badge," he said evenly, smoke curling from the barrel, "not my aim." No one spoke. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Clara stood beside him, her pulse hammering in her throat. All at once, she understood the weight behind his quiet. This was no simple rancher. This was a man who'd once carried justice like a curse. From the back of the room, chairs scraped as more men rose, Harlow's other guns. Their eyes were full of the old arrogance of men who thought fear still worked in Dry Creek. But something in the room had shifted. The townsfolk had seen the truth. The ghost of a marshal had returned, and with him came the law they'd forgotten. Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and unflinching. "I know you," she said, pointing to one of them. "You took my wagon. You took my husband's watch. You left me to die in the canyon." The outlaw flinched, hand twitching near his belt, but he didn't draw. No one did. The sound of Elias's single shot still echoed in their ears, louder than thunder. Outside, more townspeople gathered in the street, drawn by the silence inside. For the first time in years, they looked toward the saloon not with fear, but with hope. The man behind the bar began to back away. "You don't want trouble, Crow. Harlow runs this town now." He'll what?" Elias asked, his voice steady as the earth. The answer came not from the barkeep but from above. The saloon balcony creaked, and heavy boots sounded overhead. Shadows moved against the lantern light, and a slow, mocking clap filled the air. "Well," a voice drawled from the top of the stairs. "Ain't this a picture?" Every head turned. Clay Harlow leaned on the railing, smiling down like a man welcoming old company. His hair was streaked with gray now, but his eyes still held that cruel amusement, the kind that made men nervous just to stand near him. A gold chain glinted at his vest, someone else's pocket watch, Clara realized. Her husband's. "Marshal Crow," Harlow said, savoring the name. "Didn't think you'd crawl out of whatever hole you buried yourself in. And for what?" His gaze slid to Clara, and his smile deepened. "A beggar woman?" Elias didn't flinch. He holstered his revolver slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Funny thing about beggars," he said. "They've got nothing left to lose." The silence that followed was electric, the kind that makes even the wind step back. Harlow's grin twitched, but he didn't reply. He only stared down, eyes glittering with something between amusement and unease. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains again, dark clouds gathering above the town like judgment come late. The people of Dry Creek watched from the street as lightning flashed behind the saloon sign. Inside, Elias Crow stood motionless in the center of the room, hand resting lightly near his holster, while the ghost of his past smiled down from the balcony. Somewhere in that long heavy pause between lightning and thunder, the town held its breath, because every soul in Dry Creek knew the storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. The storm came down from the hills like a beast waking from sleep, rolling across the plains with growling thunder and sheets of rain that blurred the world into motion. Elias led the horses into the barn and shut the doors against the wind, his hands moving with the practiced calm of a man who'd done this 100 times before. Clara followed, her skirts soaked, her breath trembling in the cold. The air smelled of wet hay and dust, of iron and something heavier, fear. She sank to her knees beside the wall, shivering. "They'll come," she said. "You saw Harlow's eyes. He won't let us walk away." Elias hung his hat on a nail, checked the latch again, then looked at her. "I know." She stared up at him, anger sparking through the exhaustion. "Then why aren't we running?" "Because some things," he said quietly, "you stop running from or you never stop at all." Lightning split the air, lighting the barn in white fire. For an instant she saw the scars that crossed his hands, thin pale lines that told of years behind a badge. When the thunder followed, she asked the question that had been burning since the night she saw his gun. "You were law?" Elias turned slow, his shoulders heavy. "Was," he said. "Once." The wind slammed the barn doors, rattling them on their hinges. He walked to the window, staring out at the desert bleeding into twilight. "I wore the star in this town." Harlow's name wasn't feared back then, he was just another drifter with more bullets than brains. But one summer he got bold. Robbed a mail coach, killed 2 men, took a deputy's son hostage. "I went after him." His voice roughened. "Caught him too. Sent him to Yuma. Thought that'd be the end of it." Clara watched his hands curl into fists. "When he broke out, he came for me. Burned my ranch. My wife didn't make it out. His eyes flicked toward her, gray and hollow. I buried the badge with her. Figured justice was just a word folks used when they wanted to sleep easier. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Rain hammered the roof, slipping through cracks to darken the dirt floor. Clara felt the truth sink into her chest. Why he'd stopped for her, why he'd given her his last piece of bread. Not out of pity. Out of memory. She covered her face with her hands, tears mingling with the dust. You fed me because you knew what it was to starve. Elias didn't answer, just knelt beside her and placed a small rifle in her lap. The wood was smooth and cold. I don't aim to see another good soul left hungry by that man. Outside, a horse whinnied, sharp and sudden. Elias's head snapped up. He crossed to the window, wiped the condensation away with his sleeve, and cursed under his breath. They're here. Through the rain, shadows moved, half a dozen riders fanning out around the barn, their shapes ghostly in the lightning flashes. One carried a lantern, the others moved with guns drawn, their voices low and cruel in the storm's roar. Clara gripped the rifle. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Elias opened the revolver, checked each round, and snapped it shut with quiet finality. You ever fired one? She shook her head. Then you'll learn quick. He handed her a single cartridge. One bullet. One chance. Don't waste it on fear. The first shot came through the wall, splintering wood above her head. She ducked, gasping as hay and dust rained down. Elias moved with eerie calm, pushing a crate aside to make room near the window. He returned fire once, twice, the thunder swallowing the cracks of his gun. Outside, someone screamed. Another shot answered, closer this time. The gang was tightening its circle. Lightning poured through the slats, painting the barn in flashes of silver and shadow. Clara crawled to the far side, peering through a gap. She saw a man crouched by the fence, rifle raised. Her hands trembled, but she remembered Elias's voice. Justice doesn't ask if you're ready. She lifted the rifle, braced it against the post, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder, but she saw the man fall. Her breath caught, half terror, half disbelief. Elias glanced back, eyes hard but approving. Good. Then the barn doors shuttered, and 3 men burst through, soaked and shouting. Elias turned, firing before they could blink. 2 fell, 1 screamed as his gun flew from his hand. The air filled with smoke and rain and the metallic scent of spent powder. When the thunder rolled again, only 1 horse remained outside. On it sat Clay Harlow, cloak snapping in the wind, eyes cold as the lightning behind him. He dismounted slowly, walking through the mud toward the barn, his boots sinking deep. Elias stepped out into the open, revolver still smoking. It ends here, Clay. Harlow smiled, rain streaming down his face. You always were fond of dramatics, Marshal. Not anymore. Elias tossed the empty revolver into the mud between them. Pick it up. Harlow stared at it, then at Elias. And what happens if I do? Elias's voice was low, steady, carrying through the storm. Then you'll have your fair chance. The outlaw hesitated, water dripping from his hat brim. Then he laughed, slow and ugly. You're still the same fool who thought law could beat hunger. He bent to pick it up. A shot cracked the night before his fingers touched the gun. Harlow's body jerked, then went still. Clara stood behind him in the doorway, rain running down her face, the rifle trembling in her hands. Elias didn't move for a long time. The thunder rolled across the plains again, softer now, like the last breath of a dying storm. Then he walked to Harlow's fallen body bent, and closed the man's eyes. By dawn, the sky was clear, the rain spent. The streets of Dry Creek steamed in the early light. Elias walked through the town in silence, his coat torn, his revolver holstered, the weight of the night still hanging from his shoulders. Clara followed a few paces behind, the rifle slung over her shoulder. Inside the saloon, the survivors watched as he approached the counter. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and laid something on the worn wood, a star-shaped badge, its metal dulled with years of dust and regret. Justice don't come from the law, he said quietly. It comes from who you feed when you're hungry. No one answered. No one needed to. When he stepped outside, the sun was breaking over the mesas, painting the land in gold. Clara stood beside him, eyes still red but fierce with something new life. He nodded toward the horizon. You'll stay. She looked toward the empty road that led away from town. You gave me bread, she said softly. I'll give this land back a little kindness. They rode out together, the storm-washed earth glistening under their horses' hooves. Behind them, Dry Creek began to breathe again, a town reborn from silence. In the years that followed, The story spread like wind across the frontier. Folks spoke of a starving girl who found mercy in the dust, and a silent rancher who remembered what justice used to mean. Some said he was a marshal once. Others said he was a ghost. But those who knew the truth just said this: on the night the storm broke over Dry Creek, two souls who had nothing left gave back what the West had lost. And when they were gone, the land was quiet, as if the wind itself bowed in respect.